Out of the cold northern fog, dark ships appeared on the horizon. Their dragon-headed bows cut through the waves as frightened villagers watched from the shore. To many people, the Vikings were fierce warriors who came only to raid, burn, and conquer. That is the image that has survived for centuries. But the real story is far more surprising. The Vikings were not only raiders. They were skilled sailors, clever traders, and fearless explorers. They built some of the best ships of their time. They created trade routes that stretched across Europe and beyond. They founded settlements in distant lands and became some of the greatest travelers of the Middle Ages. Yet their story was not one of endless success. Their world was filled with war, family rivalries, failed colonies, and struggles for power. In time, the very age they created would begin to fade away. So how did a small group of people from the frozen north become the terror of Europe? How did they travel farther than almost anyone else of their age? And why did the Viking Age suddenly come to an end? Today, we will follow their complete journey. From little-known farmers living in Scandinavia to world-changing explorers whose legacy can still be seen today. Let's begin at the beginning. In this story, you will learn who the Vikings really were, how they rose to power, how they conquered, traded, explored new lands, and changed history forever. We will travel through the years from about 700 AD to 1100 AD, a period known as the Viking Age. Their influence shaped England, changed Europe, reached North America, and left a cultural legacy that still survives today. Long before the Viking longships appeared on Europe's shores, the people of Scandinavia lived in a land shaped by nature. This northern region, which includes modern-day Norway, Sweden, and Denmark, was a place of great beauty but also great hardship. Tall mountains rose across the landscape. Thick forests covered vast areas of land. Deep fjords cut into the rocky coastline, creating narrow waterways that stretched far inland. Winters were long, dark, and cold. Snow and ice often covered the ground for months at a time. Life was never easy. The people who lived there were part of the early Germanic tribes. Most families survived through farming, fishing, hunting, and raising animals. They grew what crops they could during the short summers and relied on the sea for food during the rest of the year. Fishing boats were a common sight along the coast, while small farms dotted the valleys and open fields. These communities were often separated by mountains, forests, and long distances. Because of this, people usually lived in small villages led by local chiefs. There was no single king ruling all of Scandinavia. Instead, many tribes controlled their own lands and made their own laws. Loyalty to family and tribe was one of the most important parts of life. Their beliefs were very different from those of later Christian Europe. They followed an old pagan religion filled with powerful gods, magical creatures, and heroic stories. They believed that the thunder in the sky came from the mighty god Thor. They honored Odin, the wise god of war and knowledge. They told stories about giants, monsters, and a final battle that would one day end the world. These beliefs helped explain the dangers and mysteries of the world around them. They gave people courage during harsh winters and comfort during difficult times. But these isolated communities were still not yet the Vikings history would remember. Over time, life in Scandinavia began to change. The population slowly grew, and more people needed land to farm and build homes. But good farmland was limited. Much of the region was covered by mountains, forests, and rocky ground. As villages became larger, competition for land became stronger. Young men looking for wealth and opportunity often found that there was little room for them at home. Some saw travel as the answer. Others saw it as a chance to gain power, riches, and honor. At the same time, Scandinavian craftsmen were making important improvements in shipbuilding. Their ships became faster, stronger, and more reliable than ever before. These long, narrow vessels could cross rough seas, sail along coastlines, and even travel up shallow rivers. With these ships, people could reach places that had once seemed far beyond their world. Soon, small groups began sailing away from Scandinavia. Some traveled to trade with distant communities. Others searched for new land. But many came looking for valuable goods they could take by force. Then came an event that would shock Europe. In the year 793 AD, Viking warriors crossed the sea and attacked the monastery of Lindisfarne, a small island off the coast of England. The monastery was rich but poorly defended. The attackers looted its treasures and left destruction behind them. News of the raid spread quickly across Europe. To many people, it seemed as if fierce warriors had appeared from nowhere. Today, historians often point to the attack on Lindisfarne as the beginning of the Viking Age. The word Viking itself likely came from an Old Norse term connected to sea journeys or raids. Not every Scandinavian person was a Viking. The word was mainly used for those who sailed abroad to trade, explore, or fight. What began as a few daring voyages would soon grow into something much larger. The people of Scandinavia were preparing to leave their mark on the world, and Europe was about to feel their presence in ways it had never imagined. The foundations of a new era had been laid. As the Viking Age gathered speed, one invention changed everything: the longship. These remarkable vessels were fast, light, and flexible. Their shallow design allowed them to travel across open seas and move deep into rivers. A Viking fleet could appear suddenly on a coastline, strike quickly, and disappear before local forces could respond. The longship became the tool that carried Viking influence across much of Europe. Year after year, Viking crews sailed farther from Scandinavia. They raided coastal towns, attacked monasteries, and explored new regions. Monasteries were often easy targets because they held valuable treasures but had few defenses. Gold, silver, books, and other riches were carried back across the sea. With every successful voyage, wealth flowed into Viking lands. Powerful leaders gained more followers by sharing treasure and rewards. The strongest chieftains built larger fleets and gathered greater armies. Success at sea often meant power at home. But the Vikings were more than raiders. Many were traders who connected distant parts of the world. Viking merchants traveled through rivers and seas, exchanging furs, iron, amber, and other goods. Their trading networks stretched across Europe and reached lands far beyond Scandinavia. Busy trading centers grew, bringing new wealth and new ideas. During this period, several famous Viking leaders entered legend and history. One of the most famous was Ragnar Lothbrok, a warrior whose story mixed real events with legend. Tales described him as a fearless leader who won great victories and became one of the most celebrated figures in Viking tradition. Another was Ivar the Boneless, believed to be one of Ragnar's sons. Known for his intelligence and determination, he became a feared commander who led Viking armies in England. There was also Harald Fairhair, a powerful ruler who worked to unite much of Norway under one king. His rise marked an important step toward stronger Viking kingdoms. For a time, it seemed that Viking power would only continue to grow. Their ships ruled the seas, their warriors inspired fear, and their traders reached distant lands. But Europe was beginning to fight back. For many years, the Vikings seemed unstoppable. Their ships crossed seas and rivers, their warriors won victories, and their influence spread across Europe. But success brought new challenges, and the tide slowly began to turn. The kingdoms of Europe were learning from their defeats. Kings and local rulers built stronger defenses along their coasts and rivers. Armies became better organized. Towns added walls and watchmen kept a closer eye on the sea. Viking raids that had once been easy now became far more dangerous. At the same time, not every Viking expedition ended in victory. Some fleets were defeated in battle. Others were struck by storms, disease, or hunger. Long journeys carried great risks, and many warriors never returned home. Problems also grew within Scandinavia itself. Powerful chieftains competed for wealth, land, and control. Old alliances broke apart. Rival leaders fought one another, sometimes causing long and bitter civil wars. Instead of joining forces, many Vikings spent their strength fighting fellow Scandinavians. Nature added even more pressure. Harsh winters could destroy crops and leave communities struggling to survive. Resources were not endless. As populations continued to grow, competition for land and wealth became even more intense. For a time, it may have seemed that Viking expansion was reaching its limit. The easy victories of earlier years were becoming harder to achieve. Enemies were stronger. Internal divisions were deeper. The future of the Viking world appeared uncertain. Yet the Vikings were skilled at adapting to change. Rather than relying only on raids, many chose to settle permanently in new lands. Viking communities appeared in England, Ireland, France, and other regions. They farmed, traded, and built towns. Some Viking leaders formed alliances with local rulers, while others became rulers themselves. These changes helped create new sources of wealth and stability. The Vikings were no longer just visitors arriving by sea. In many places, they became part of the societies they had once attacked. The age of constant raiding was slowly giving way to something new. The challenges had been severe, but the Viking world had not collapsed. The Vikings had survived, but they would emerge transformed. By the late 9th and 10th centuries, the Viking world had reached its highest point. What had begun as scattered raids had grown into a powerful civilization that stretched across seas, rivers, and continents. In England, Viking influence became so strong that a large part of the country came under their control. This region became known as the Danelaw. Here, Viking customs, laws, and traditions mixed with those of the local people. Towns grew, trade increased, and Viking leaders ruled over vast areas of land. At the same time, Viking merchants were traveling farther than ever before. Their trade routes connected northern Europe with distant lands. Some journeyed through the rivers of Eastern Europe to the great city of Constantinople, the capital of the Byzantine Empire. Others traded with merchants from the Middle East. Silver, silk, spices, and many other goods flowed through Viking hands. The Vikings were also building important settlements. One of the most successful was Dublin in Ireland. What began as a Viking settlement grew into a busy center of trade and activity. Ships arrived carrying goods from many different regions. Far to the west, Viking explorers pushed into lands few Europeans had ever seen. Settlers reached Iceland and built farming communities in a harsh but beautiful landscape. Later, a famous explorer named Eric the Red led settlers to Greenland, where new colonies were established along the coast. The spirit of exploration did not stop there. Around the year 1000, Eric's son, Leif Erikson, sailed even farther west. He reached the shores of North America centuries before Christopher Columbus. Although the settlement there did not last, the voyage remains one of the greatest achievements in Viking history. The Vikings were not only warriors and explorers. They were also skilled artists and craftsmen. They created beautiful jewelry, carved wood with detailed designs, and produced works filled with animals, patterns, and symbols. Their stories and legends were passed down through generations and became an important part of their culture. This was the Viking Golden Age. Their ships crossed oceans, their traders linked distant worlds, and their settlements stretched across the North Atlantic. Wealth flowed into their lands, and their influence could be felt across much of Europe. The Viking spirit of exploration also lives on. Long before many other Europeans crossed the Atlantic, Viking sailors explored distant coastlines and reached North America centuries before Columbus. Their trade routes connected people from Northern Europe to the Byzantine Empire and the Middle East, helping goods, ideas, and cultures move across great distances. Today, Viking stories remain popular around the world. Their myths, heroes, and gods appear in books, movies, television shows, and video games. Historic sites and museums attract millions of visitors who want to learn more about this remarkable civilization. The Vikings changed Europe forever. They helped shape kingdoms, expanded trade networks, explored unknown lands, and connected distant civilizations. In the end, the question the Vikings faced was the same question every civilization faces. How do you preserve your identity while adapting to a changing world? Perhaps that is why their story still matters today. Great civilizations are remembered not only for how they rise, but for what they leave behind. From isolated Scandinavian tribes, to feared raiders, to explorers, traders, and kings, the Vikings built a legacy that still shapes the modern world. If you enjoyed this documentary, be sure to like the video, subscribe for more history documentaries, and let us know in the comments which civilization we should cover next. And as always, we'll see you in the next video.